Air Twister is an on-rails shooting game that first released back in 2022 via Apple Arcade. It was produced by Yu Suzuki, who during his time at SEGA headed up their AM2 team, responsible for a number of classic arcade games including Hang On, Outrun and Space Harrier, a fantastic on-rails shooter from back in the day. But can Air Twister recapture some of that old magic, or should Suzuki have stuck rather than twisted? Well, thank you to the publishing team for the review code, and now let's find out. In terms of story then, you play as Princess Arch, who is trying to defend her homeworld Air from a large-scale invasion. This culminates in a number of stages, typically ending with a large boss battle, and whilst most of the time you will play as Princess Arch herself, controlling her directly, for some of these boss battles you are assisted by a flying creature of some description, with these winged mounts ranging from flying fish, swans and even elephants. So gameplay wise then, this plays very much as you would expect if you've ever played something like Space Harrier, with you controlling your character directly, moving them across the screen with the left stick, and targeting and firing at enemies with the ZR button. Stages are fairly short, couple of minutes long at most, and as I mentioned earlier, usually end with a boss battle, and these for the most part are large screen filling enemies, and you'll need to learn their attacks, firing all the while to take them down. The gameplay itself is very simple, most of what I've said covers a lot of what you need to know. The only other real mechanic in terms of pure gameplay is that of your targeting system, which is carried out not by holding down a button or anything like that, just by moving across the path parallel to an enemy's path, which will automatically highlight any enemy in that vicinity. Now doing so will earn you stars, and these will show at the top of your screen, and these stars can be used later once your run is over and be spent on a number of upgrades. This was something I wasn't expecting. I didn't expect there to be any sort of meta progression, and it was a very nice surprise, as when you first start the game up you are only really given the option to start to play. So when you do die for the first time and use up all your continues, it was quite interesting to see this new menu open up with a few different options. So the stars I mentioned earlier, if you go into the upgrade screen, you'll see that you'll be able to use these to buy extra health. Now health works in such a way that you'll have small hearts, and each time you take a hit obviously you lose some of these, but having 20 of these hearts will create a larger heart shown above. These are effectively your lives. You can use the stars to buy extra small hearts, and every time you hit 20, obviously you'll gain yourself a new larger heart, and this will then carry over into any run you then take part in story mode. You can also buy things like shields to help you with some of the bosses, as well as more cosmetic items to change the look of your character. Now I mentioned story mode specifically because as well as this there is also an arcade mode that you can take part in, as well as a few other game modes, things such as turbo mode, boss rush and even a few bonus games. There's a lot more content here than you would initially expect. As well as this, there's also an event system. Now this is shown at the top of the screen, and you can earn tokens by taking part in daily or weekly challenges. These can be things like just booting the game up, or taking down a particular number of enemies, or earning a certain amount of stars. You can then use these tokens to actually buy new weapons, again to use in story mode. You cannot use any of the meta progression style items in arcade mode. Here instead you are just given a large amount of health, no continues, none of those upgrades as I mentioned, and you go as far as you can with that in mind. As far as I could see there was no online rankings, which is a shame. Definitely something that would have extended the replayability, but the gameplay itself is a lot of fun, it works very well, and I found myself booting the game up for one more run quite often, more so than I expected. My only real issue with the gameplay would have been that sometimes, especially later on when things get more hectic, it was quite difficult to see some of the bullets and projectiles coming your way. They did blend in with the background a little bit sometimes, but I do struggle with things like this, so this may have just been a very personal experience. It gets 17 out of 20. Controls are very good. It takes a little bit of getting used to just to line your shots up exactly as you would have wanted, but on the whole they do what they need to do well, and they get 18 out of 20. Now in terms of the visuals, Air Twister goes for a fantastical world, and there's a lot of variety in between stages. Some of the levels look like they've taken inspiration from video games of old. There was certainly a Panzer Dragoon feel to some of the stages, but then you have others that look almost like they belong in Alice in Wonderland, with overgrown huge flowers as you pass through, before potentially on the next stage you're blasting off into space. I really did enjoy the variety that you encountered. Talking of variety, this also applies to the enemies with a large number of different types on each stage, and again those boss battles are a lot of fun and very imaginative in terms of the enemies that you'll face. Performance wise, things ran well. It does run at 30 frames per second, but I didn't notice any drops at all during my playthrough. There is a slight plasticine type feel to the main character, noticeable much more in cutscenes than in game, and some of the fonts used again just had that mobile feel to them. But on the whole, I did like the game, especially when it was in motion. I felt that it was a very interesting world to explore, and I commend the team for the amount of variety and imagination shown across each level. When we come to the audio, now this is probably the most interesting aspect of the game for me, with the soundtrack provided by an artist known as Valencia, a Dutch artist that specialises in rock opera. Now, as far as I read, Yu Suzuki is a big fan and reached out personally to Valencia to ask them to do the soundtrack for this game. For me, I just don't feel the music is necessarily appropriate for the on-screen action. That isn't a knock against the artist, the music itself is of a good standard, I just don't feel it fits with the action as you play. Without knowing anything about this artist, I feel they're very heavily inspired in terms of their work by Queen. You definitely get that vibe as you listen to it, but even then it's not Queen's more high octane music, it's definitely that more melodic approach they took to some of their songs, and it just feels very out of place. Obviously, being rock opera, you do have those more operatic moments that feel grand in scale, almost like they could be a part of a film like Gladiator or The Omen, but then you go back to this very melodic type of music and it just feels very odd. Talking of Queen, actually, it almost reminded me of the part in Shaun of the Dead where whilst they're fighting the zombies in the pub, they accidentally put the jukebox on and Don't Stop Me Now comes on, and they're kind of screaming at someone to kill the music as they're fighting the enemies. This is how I felt playing. I must say I did start to get used to it after a while. I mean, it's what's there, and after a while it just starts to seep into your subconscious, and it's not even that the music wasn't to my taste, which it wasn't, it's more a case I just don't feel it fits what's going on screen at all. Very personal of course, but for me, yeah, just a bit off kilter. Visuals, while never mind-blowing, do the job well, and I loved the variety across stages. They get 15 out of 20. Audio, in terms of the music itself, is good, although I just don't think it fits with this style of gameplay, and it did get a bit repetitive after a while as well. It gets 12 out of 20. Air Twister costs £19.99 and regional equivalents are on your screen now. For this price you are getting 12 stages in the story mode. I mean, you can blitz through them in a couple of minutes each if you're good at such games. Other people may find it more difficult. Obviously, if you lose your continues, you'll have to start again. So your mileage will really depend on your skill level to some degree. But there's replayability here in terms of high scores, albeit not online, as well as a number of other game modes as I mentioned, and this definitely does fill the package out. Production values are also quite high, although it did feel that the choice of some of the fonts and the character model to some degree did bring this down a tad, but on the whole, value gets 16 out of 20. To conclude, in terms of the gameplay when it comes to Air Twister, you can definitely feel the presence of someone like Yu Suzuki behind it, as it fulfills all of the necessary requirements to be a very good on-rail shooter. The levels are quick and high energy, the controls are responsive, and there's a nice amount of variety within each stage. Obviously it's lost most of its points down to the music. Now if you like the style of music, you'll have to factor that into the overall score. For me it wasn't, as I said, about the quality of the music or even my preferences in terms of music itself, it was more about does it match how I'm feeling as I'm playing, and for me it just didn't. Doesn't take away though from what is a very fun game to play, one to pick up when the physical edition is a bit cheaper or if it goes on a slight sale. Air Twister gets a SwitchUp score of 78%. Thank you everybody for watching this review, I hope you enjoyed it. Please do remember to leave a like if you did. Don't forget, if you're looking for eShop credit to pick it up, you can get your eShop cards via our website switchup.gg, Doing so will get you 5% of your purchase price back in cashback that you can then use against a future purchase, and you'll also get another 5% straight discount if you use the code SwitchUp. There's also a code down there to Play Asia. If you're looking to import any games, use the link, use the code stated, and you'll get yourself 5% off of your order. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.